In the spring of 1965, Bob Dylan drove to Memphis. Not to perform, not for a recording session, not for any professional reason that appears in any official record of his movements during that period. He drove to Memphis because he wanted to see Sun's studio. Bob Dylan was 23 years old in the spring of 1965. He had just released Bringing It All Back Home. He was in the process of making the most consequential creative pivot in popular music since Elvis Presley had walked into Sun's studio in 1953 and recorded something that didn't have a name yet. Dylan was moving from acoustic folk to electric rock. The folk community he had come from considered this a betrayal. The rock world he was moving toward didn't entirely understand what he was bringing. He was between, in the uncomfortable, necessary space between what he had been and what he was becoming. He drove to Memphis in a car he had borrowed from a friend. He arrived on a Tuesday morning. He parked on Union Avenue. He stood outside Sun's studio and looked at the building. Then he went inside. The man behind the desk was a studio employee named Briggs, a sound engineer in his late 30s who had worked at Sun since the early days of the label. He recognized Dylan. He didn't say so immediately. Dylan asked if he could look around. Briggs said yes. Dylan walked through the building. He spent time in the main recording room, the room where Elvis had recorded That's All Right, where Johnny Cash had recorded I Walk the Line, where Jerry Lee Lewis had recorded Great Balls of Fire. Briggs followed at a respectful distance. He described Dylan moving through the room slowly, looking at the acoustic tiles, looking at the position of the microphone stands, looking at the control room window. He stood in the center of the room for a long time. Then he sat down on the floor. Briggs described this with the specificity of someone who had replayed the image many times. Dylan sat cross-legged on the floor of the Sun studio recording room, his back straight, his eyes closed. Carl did not ask what he was doing. He waited. Dylan sat on the floor for approximately 20 minutes. Then he opened his eyes. He looked at Carl. "What did it feel like?" Dylan said. Carl asked what he meant. "When it was happening," Dylan said. "When Elvis was in here. What did it feel like to be in the room?" Carl thought about it. He had been working at Sun when Elvis recorded. He had been a young engineer. He had been in the room. "It felt like something was being invented," Carl said, "and nobody knew what to call it yet." Dylan nodded. He said, "That's what I'm trying to do." Carl looked at him. "Then you're in the right place," Carl said. Dylan stood up. He walked back through the building. He stopped at the door. He turned to Carl. "Did he know?" Dylan asked. "Elvis. Did he know what he was doing?" Carl thought about this. "No," Carl said. "I don't think he knew at all." Dylan was quiet. "Good," Dylan said. He walked out. He got in the borrowed car. He drove away. Briggs described this story in a memoir he self-published in 1991. It was not widely distributed. It sold a few hundred copies. It is held in the Memphis Music Archive. Nobody has widely cited the story. Nobody has sought to verify it independently. It exists in one account, in a self-published memoir, by a man who worked at Sun Studio and who had no particular motive to invent it. What it contains, if it is true, is something remarkable. It contains Bob Dylan, at 23, in the process of the most important creative decision of his life, sitting on the floor of the room where Elvis had created something without knowing what it was, looking for whatever it was that had been in that room, and finding, apparently, the permission he was looking for. Highway 61 Revisited was recorded in June 1965, 2 months after the Memphis visit. It begins with "Like a Rolling Stone." It is considered by many music historians to be the most important album in the history of rock and roll. Not because of its sales, not because of its commercial impact, because of what it said music could be. Because it invented something without knowing what to call it, the same way Elvis had, in the same room 12 years earlier. Carl Briggs died in 1998. His memoir is in the archive. The 20 minutes on the floor, the question about what it felt like, the answer Dylan gave. That's what I'm trying to do. And the question about whether Elvis knew. Good, Dylan said, because the people who know what they're doing are doing what's already been done. And the people who invent something new are always the ones who don't know what they're making. Elvis didn't know in 1953. Dylan found that knowledge on a studio floor in 1965, and then went and made something of his own that nobody had a name for yet, either.